Hi everyone, it's Wednesday, May the 10th. Haven't checked in with you guys in a while, so I'm going to do a little bit of a wrap up for scripture, but I want to focus more on the next module, morality and ethics. And so first I want to start by saying thank you for the participation in this class is really, really outstanding. For the most part, we're together. The odd time some people fall behind, that's just a given. That's going to happen in any course, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's online. And even myself, I had an issue last week that made me fall behind a little bit. So unfortunately, we can't stop life from happening. But I appreciate the emails and letting me know what's going on if you fall behind. And that is just wonderful, and I love the community that's being built in the groups that are formed. You guys are really coming together, and great discussions, great feedback to one another, great affirmations with each other in the group, and very detailed posts. You guys are really thorough, and again, I am really impressed. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for the effort, because this is what it's all about. So very quickly, we've finished John's Gospel for the most part. This is not the end. Keep learning. John is just such an amazing resource for faith. And to just focus on those few passages were wonderful, but you need to go more into depth. So my suggestion always is that we should be ongoing in terms of learning scripture. We should have our Living with Christ, which I'll pray from with you guys at the end. And this way we can, focus on the synoptics every year as we go through the 3-year cycle of the synoptics. We keep hearing the same stories over and over again because that's the way we're going to grow into it and we're going to really understand scripture. John is seasonal. John is every year. You should spend time during Lent and just focus on John and grow deeper into understanding and get your commentary. So for today's reading out of John, I pulled out my big commentary, my Raymond Brown biblical commentary, just to kind of see what was today's passage, if I could unpack it a little deeper for you guys. So you should be on your way to being scripture scholars now as Catholic educators. And always my hope is that many of you will see the value of taking your Master's in Religious Ed. Despite your subject area, despite what you're teaching, that's going to strengthen our system. The more people that can speak our language, our theological language, the more people that can think theologically and understand how this all works, the stronger our system's going to be. So as we just finished Catholic Education Week, not too long ago, those are the things we should be focusing on. How do we celebrate it, but how do we make our system stronger? And how do we pass this enduring gift to the next generation? So, I'll come back to John in a minute when I do read today's scripture passage, but let me introduce you to the ethics and morality section. This is always a very delicate module, even in class, because it really does hit on some topics that are very controversial, and it really does touch on a lot of passion in terms of what people believe. And often what is happening in our church is people don't really understand what we're called to believe. So there's a lot of misinformation, and a lot of that comes from the church itself, right? Where people within the church have their own bias, where they have an experience or a fear or a lack of understanding. I mean, there's all kinds of people that make up our church, whether they're clergy, whether they're laity like us. We all have opinions, and we do base some of our opinions from the experiences in our lives, if that makes any sense in that what I just said. But the church does teach specific things about morality and ethics, and we as Catholic educators really have to understand what the church teaches and try to put aside our own biases and maybe some of our own ignorance in terms of what the church teaches. Okay, so when we delve into the part 3, morality and ethics, this is sort of the stuff that is really current, because we're going to be talking about sexuality. We're also going to be talking about church's social teachings. That's going to come in. That's a huge part of part 2, and it's come back into this, into the part 3 too, because it is the foundation in terms of how the church responds and the dignity of human life. But that sense of what you learned in terms of dignity of human life, we need to continue to put that in the forefront. And when we do this module, because that's the platform in which the church begins its moral teachings. and developing our formed conscience. We as Catholics are decision makers. We're called to inform our conscience. So those are the things we can't forget about in terms of what we learned in part 2 and part 1. And often when we get to part 3, we're at different places. Some of us have taken part 2 just recently, some of us took it a while back, and some of us might have forgotten some of this stuff. So just a quick recap as we enter into this module of these foundational things that we need to know as we unpack the topics that are assigned for you in the online course. So first of all, what's really important to understand is we have a manual, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, that helps us unpack our church teachings and helps us unpack scripture, okay? So we should know what the Catechism writes about certain topics. So let's start with conscience first of all. When we make a decision has to be made carefully, especially the big ones, even as much as the small ones. I always use the example of pressing the snooze alarm when I teach this with part 2 in terms of a decision, you know, pretty harmless, but it could impact the events of the day. And most times we're going to get away with the day and everything's going to be fine. But pressing that snooze could make you late enough where you make a decision that could hurt someone, like getting into the car and going through a yellow light that turns red and getting an accident. So you guys get it, right? But then that decision making goes even deeper when we make bigger decisions where it hurts and impacts many lives in your family, in your workplace, and it has a ripple effect. And so when we make our decisions, we have to be prepared for a good outcome and for a bad outcome. And that's what the church tries to teach us when we do our process of discernment in informing our conscience. But the bottom line, and this is what a lot of people miss, it's in the Catechism, and it's 1782. So that's not the page number, it's the section in the Catechism, 1782, and it comes under the section of moral conscience, which is Article 6. And it says here, man has the right to act in conscience and in freedom so as personally to make moral decisions. He must not be forced to act contrary to his conscience. And that's saying that this conscience has taken a process to be informed. It's thought about it, it's prayed, it's talked to people, it's talked to someone in the church, it's examined every angle. It's not a decision that has been taken lightly, okay? Nor must he be prevented from acting according to his conscience, especially in religious matters. So a lot of people don't know that, because the bottom line is eventually the decision comes down to us. And that could be tricky. And this is why a lot of people really have a hard time in the church with Vatican II, because these changes came about in Vatican II. And so a lot of people feel that this process of an informed conscience has allowed us to create moral relativism. That there's this huge gray area which didn't exist prior to Vatican II. It was one way or the other. And now with this process of search and informing our conscience, we've created this gray area that a lot of people are not comfortable with, and it causes a lot of controversy in the church. So I hope that kind of explains that part of it. If not, just message me, send me an email. I can go over this again, but I don't want to take up too much time, just in case this is just basically a review for some people, maybe. I'm not sure. So then when we go into issues of sexuality, that's huge, because we as teachers are dealing with the morals of our sexual decision making starting at a very early age. It used to be focused onto high school, then late elementary school, and now our children are becoming sexual at a very early age. I'm sure those of you who teach primary even though kids are not in relationship with one another, they are giving a sexual persona. The way they dress, the music they listen to, the way they act, they are mimicking the adults or the older teenagers who are expressing their sexuality, and these young innocent children are dressing and becoming these sexual beings before their time, if that makes any sense. And also the development of the bodies are changing with hormones, and there's just so many factors that are built into challenging us in terms of our sexual teachings. Even in terms of when these teachings were created, there was a different timeline in terms of a person's life. Once upon a time there was no adolescence. You were a child and then you were an adult. You hit the age of puberty. There was no school. This is a turn of the century, last century kind of development in humanity. And you basically got married. So when we talk about Mary being, wed at the age of 12 or 13, or, that was pretty common, because she wasn't going to high school. She was, it was time for her to get married and have children. But that all changed with education expanding into secondary. And so our children who became sexually developed then were told to sit at a desk, get an education, and not act on their natural sexuality and their urges. So this becomes problematic in our society and our moral teachings of the church, because the church puts this teaching of our sexuality into the context of marriage, because it was the right place to put it at the time, right? Because when are you mature? When are you ready to take responsibility? When are you ready to save your money? When is it a good time that if you're going to create a life, because we are created as co-creators with God. God created us equipped to keep life going. That's one of our main purposes in humanity, the way God designed us, right? Where should we be bringing in new life? When we're a little older, settled, and we can take care of this life, right? So it's the dignity of human life. This is, the week where we celebrate life. The March for Life is taking place right now in Ottawa, and schools are there, and this is a concern with the church. So whether you're 13, 23, 33, 43, 53, oh, I'm 53. If you are going to have sex, you should be asking yourself the question, am I ready at this moment to take care of another life, to accept a life, whether you're married or not? This is huge. This is a great responsibility. And that's why we have the teachings of the church. They're not the party pooper. The church preserves life and is concerned with the dignity of human life. And we as the church, because we in Catholic schools are now probably the prime source of church for these kids, have to understand the teachings of the church so we can give kids the option that you don't have to have sex. Even though society and peers are telling you to be sexually active and you're not cool if you're not, and you don't fit in if you don't, we have to be able to tell them that, hey, don't worry, it's okay not to have sex. In fact, it's good for you to wait until you are ready for that, and not just jump on board. If you look at the statistics, there's statistics out there in terms of, what happens physically to young people who start being sexually active at an early age, and what it does to them physically, psychologically, and sexually. So it's more than just moral teachings of the church. It's not healthy for young people to engage so quickly into something that can really affect them into the future and create issues for them into the future. The dignity of human life is the person having sex and the life that could be potentially created from that sexual act. Huge, huge. So I can see already by the time on my phone here that I'm not going to be able to finish, because I like to have these under 15 minutes. So I'm going to have to do a part 2. And in that part 2, I'll continue to unpack just a few more issues about the church, morality, teachings, and then I'll end with scripture, okay? Get ready for part 2.